everyone. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I hope you've had a good morning with Roy and everybody. This weekend, of course, we are celebrating how the Queen has served Commonwealth and nation faithfully over the last 70 years. She's worked tirelessly to fulfil her duties as head of state and displayed genuine interest in the people that she rules. She's met ordinary folk, she supports charity and community groups, she travels the length and breadth of the country. And, really the question is, well, what would motivate her to do that still so faithfully now that she is 96? One of the things that I like about the Queen is that she is not afraid of getting her hands dirty. At the age of 19, the then Princess Elizabeth, I think, was probably the first royal princess to join the armies, because she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the ATS, and trained, didn't she, as a driver and a mechanic. She shocked, in fact, a visiting sheikh not too long ago, I gather, by driving him herself across the Balmoral estate. And she's very fond of animals. As you know, she particularly loves horses and dogs, and maybe not now, she's older, but originally she would have liked to take care of them herself. The Queen frequently refers to Jesus as her model and her motivation. And I wonder if the story that you've heard this morning is a personal inspiration for her and her faithful service. Despite all that I admire about the Queen, I just can't imagine her washing the feet of her footmen and her ladies in waiting. That would break all royal protocol. Yet that's exactly the line that Jesus crosses here in the story that you've heard, when he breaks off his meal to undress, wrap a towel around his waist, and start washing his disciples' feet. Because washing feet was menial. Just imagine where feet in the ancient world would have been, on dirty, dusty, sometimes smelly, I imagine, roads in their towns, cities and countryside. This task of washing feet just wasn't something that somebody who gets called teacher and Lord ought to be doing. If anything, it's what their followers ought to be doing for them. So why does he do it? Well, firstly, because he loves them. John, one of those first disciples who was around that table, recorded this account for us of Jesus' life, and he remarked on love, Jesus' love, in the introduction to his story. Jesus himself then describes towards the end of the story that this is an example for them to follow. Now that he's done that for them, shouldn't they do it for one another? Just a little bit further on, that evening he said to them openly, just as I've loved you, you should love one another. We all like to be helpful. We've all known people, though, who have abused our willingness to serve. Perhaps the boss who expects us to work overtime for free, or the neighbour who takes advantage of our goodwill. But Jesus even chooses to serve those who abuse that love of his. Judas was there at the meal, and John makes it quite clear that Jesus knew that he would betray him, but he got down on his hands and knees and washed the feet of Judas anyway. You might think of God perhaps as a demanding boss or a bothersome neighbour, of course, But the truth is that actually he wants to serve you. You know, babies don't serve their parents, but they depend on and they respond to loving attention. And when they have that pattern of love to follow, they grow up able to give and receive love themselves. And in a similar kind of way, God is on such a different level to us, like a baby and a parent, that all we can do is follow in the way of love that Jesus showed. He shows that loving service is to be the hallmark of his followers. Here's the second reason Jesus washed all their feet. John says he knew his identity and his destiny. At the very start of the story, John wrote, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he'd come from God and returned to God, and therefore he engaged in the foot washing. So what was John referring to? He was talking about Jesus' death and resurrection. Jesus loved his disciples to his dying end on the cross. Jesus, his last words from the cross echo that fact. It is finished, he says. He had completed the task for which his Father had sent him. There's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends, he was to say to them later that evening. Washing his disciples' feet was a sign of what was to come. You might have picked up on a rather curious statement halfway through Jesus makes about being clean. And actually that bit about the cross and resurrection, that is what that points to. You see, if we're honest, we know we're people with tainted lives. God has loved us and given us so much, and yet we've abused the gifts that he's given us and pursued our own selfish desires. Our tainted lives have cut us off from him and his love. And the Bible's word for that is sin. We're all the same like that, all of us. All that is, except for Jesus. And so Peter, again, one of the others around the table that night, later wrote this. He says, Christ, that's Jesus, suffered for our sins once for all. He never sinned, but he died for sinners to bring you safely home to God. To bring you safely home to God. Jesus' death on the cross can make you clean, untainted, good as new. And God sending Jesus is therefore a sign of his faithfulness to us. Despite our rejection of his love, he still loved us and sent Jesus for us. There's an awkward moment halfway through John's account of the evening when Peter objects to Jesus washing his feet. And Jesus' response is pretty direct. He says, unless I wash you, you won't belong to me. You see, we get to choose whether we want Jesus to make us clean. He's done everything necessary through the cross, but it's your choice whether you want to belong to him. Allegedly, on a recent low-key trip to Balmoral, the Queen met some American tourists whilst out walking. They didn't recognise her, so they asked politely if she lived locally, and when she mentioned that she had a house nearby, they asked if she'd ever met the Queen. She simply pointed at her royal protection officer and said, no, but he has. It strikes me that some of us are like the American tourist, maybe, that you might have heard a lot about Jesus, but you've never actually recognised him for who he is, for who he needs to be in your life, your teacher and Lord. You could do that today. In fact, it would be quite a tribute to the Jubilee, because, you know, the Queen has Jesus as her teacher-in-law, her model, her motivation. He is the only person to whom she bows a knee. So will you join her this Jubilee weekend? Will you, like the disciples around that table, accept what Jesus has done for you? He washed their feet, but he faithfully died for you to bring you safely home to God. You might like to reflect on that during this video that's coming up. It's a song that we sing in church actually quite often. It's called The Servant King.
From heaven you came, helpless babe, entered our world, your glory veiled, not to be served, but to serve, and give your life that we might live. This is our God, the servant King. He calls us now to follow him, to bring our lives as a daily offering of worship to the servant King. This is our God, the servant King. He calls us now to follow him, to bring our lives as a daily offering of worship to the servant King. Come see his hands and his feet, the scars that speak of sacrifice, hands that flung stars into space, to cruel nails surrendered. This is our God, the servant King. He calls us now to follow him, to bring our lives as a daily offering of worship to the servant King. So let us learn how to serve, and in our lives enthrone him, each other's needs to prefer, for it is Christ we're serving. This is our God, the servant King. He calls us now to follow him, to bring our lives as a daily offering of worship to the servant King. so